Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. This is Lenny Murphy here for the final session of the Festival of New MR for 2013. We're going to be doing some interesting stuff today, and one of them is an experiment for simultaneous live translation with Translate Your World. And Will is going to jump in real quickly and give you instructions on how to utilize that. Will? Thanks, Will. All right, if we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so of course we have to thank our sponsors who make all of this possible. The gold sponsors, Survey Analytics and Research Through Gaming. Silver sponsors, SMR, Kinesis, and Dub. The session sponsors, Research Now, Likeliner and Associates, and SSI. All of our supporters, Q Research Software, Korea Metrics Research, Tapestry Works, Keen's Mustard, CrowdLab, L&E Research, Schlesinger Associates, Focus Forums, EC Global Solutions, Revelation, and of course, as always, Green Book is very, very happy to be a media partner in support of New MR. So we're going to talk about what's hot in 2014, and what's going to inform that conversation is a sneak peek of the grit data. Myself, I'm chairing this, and we're going to moderate the discussion. I'm going to talk you through a few quick points on some of the grit data. Then we're going to open up a panel discussion that has Ray Poynter, Simon Chadwick, Reineke Reitsma, and Jeffrey Henning, our surprise guest, who came in this morning to help us discuss this. Of course, all are eminently qualified to discuss current trends in research and to make very educated guesses about the future. All right, so next slide, Will. So this is a sneak peek of the most recent grit study that we just wrapped up at the end of November. I'm not going to read off all of the sponsors and partners. You see it there. We had lots and lots and lots of folks participating in helping us pull this off. Next slide. So a couple housekeeping things just from a research perspective. The sample size was N equals 2,229, the largest sample that we have ever accomplished in grit by almost an order of magnitude. This is a breakdown of the sample distribution by partners. Of course, Green Book did a lot of the heavy lifting, followed by research and results in Germany. And that's important because for this wave of the study, we had a much larger international representation than we have in the past, particularly in Europe and in Germany. So that the good news is that it's a much broader global view. The not so good news is that we had to go back and weight the previous year's data to make comparisons effective. So bear in mind as we're looking at some of the comparative data that it may not match the last report, what was published, because we've weighted it to make the comparisons appropriate. But a big thank you to all of our sample source partners who helped us achieve that very significant N. Will, next slide. So here's what we're going to focus on today. One of the questions that we ask is the adoption of new techniques. Now, I'm sure most of you have participated in grit, and you know we ask a lot of questions, but this is one of the bigger topics that people tend to focus on. So we ask them to look at which of these emerging methods are currently in use and which ones are under consideration. And here's the league table, so to speak, on those methods. Online communities, 49% in use, 33% under consideration. Mobile surveys, 41% in use, 41% in consideration. Social media analytics, 36 and 40. Text analytics, 33 and 35. Big data analytics, 31 and 38. Those are the top 5, all that have over 30% in use, so a solid third. And in the case of communities, pretty close to half of the grit respondents, N equals 2,229. Sorry, guys, I have a cold. I'm trying hard not to sniff.
Hi, Lenny. Sorry if I may interrupt.
Are actively utilizing these techniques. Yes, Will.
Sorry, could you just bring the pace down a little bit for the subtitle system?
Thank you. Sorry, I got rolling there for a minute. So I will speak in a more measured cadence. This is part of our experiment today, guys, with the automated translation. So panelists, let's all keep that in mind. We may want to talk a little slower than our enthusiasm would normally force us to do. So, interesting results in terms of the top ones. Also interesting results in the bottom. We see a cluster there around the what I call the unconscious measurement techniques: facial analysis, neuromarketing, biometric response. All still fairly niche in terms of their utilization. Virtual environments remains niche. Crowdsourcing gets a little bit better. Gamification is probably the big winner there, with a lot of people looking at gamification, but still adoption being fairly low. So these are the emerging techniques that are going to help drive research over the course of the next few years. So on that note, I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit, bring in our panel, and let's talk about these results and talk about the implications on what that may mean for the industry as we move forward. So,
hi, Lenny. Just before we do,
yes, Ray.
Ray here. We have a poll about optimism, which we could run.
Please, thank you, Ray. I totally forgot about the polls. Thank you. Please, let's throw that up. So here's a quick poll. How do you feel about 2014 in terms of market research? If you can just select one, and we'll look at those results. That'll help frame the conversation effectively. Ray, when it feels like everybody's gotten through it, just throw up the results.
We've hit 73% voted, and the needle has stopped moving, so we're probably through it.
All right. Do you want to go ahead and share the results now? There we go. Okay. Well, so people are optimistic. That's great. Although that middle part, 2014 will be about the same as 2013. I would say is that really optimism or is it pragmatism? So I would read that as not many people were expecting significant change in 2014. So that definitely is a good jumping off point to talk about what the next year is going to look like. So Simon, I'd like to call on you first because you're also in the middle of fielding the Can Be Our Future of Research study right now, and I suspect that you're seeing some interesting stuff that may help shade the conversation. So what's your take on what we just saw with GRIT in terms of new technology adoption? Does that dovetail with what you're seeing in the future of research? And what do you think that bodes for 2014?
Thank you, Lenny. Yes, this does dovetail very well. I think that we know which techniques are definitely being adopted today, and our results also indicate that the more passive measurement, the neuro and bio measurements, are still niche, as you say. What interests me in these results that you just showed, Lenny, is the positioning of digital qualitative and digital ethnography. Mm-hmm. If we look at that, not only are they being taken up slowly, but the interest levels in them was very high. And this also dovetails with some very interesting findings that we're seeing, which is that the two hottest topics, on a more broad basis, that people are talking about both in the client world and perhaps to a slightly lesser extent in the agency world, are big data, and at the same time, the need to understand and really get into respondent or consumer emotion. And at first sight, these two things may seem to be completely opposite ends of the spectrum, completely conflicting. But actually, we see this as really the yin and yang of how research is developing, the yin of big data and what it can do in terms of revealing patterns, particularly behavioral patterns, and the yang of the really understanding emotions and really understanding how they affect decisions, particularly at point of purchase, as really being the why to big data's what. So seeing that digital qualitative and digital ethnography are gaining interest in the GRIT survey, I think dovetails very nicely with that.
I actually would agree wholeheartedly. That's what I'm hearing from clients as well. And it's interesting when you look at communities as being in the lead. So I think that there's certainly an integration aspect between the flexibility of doing more digital qualitative techniques with the community functioning as a bit of the hub that supports that for the why. Whilst we look at the clustering of social media analytics, text analytics, and big data, all around the kind of the mass ingestion of data to help inform that who, what, when, where, and how aspect of things. So I think that that's right on. Reineke, from Forrester's perspective, first, what do you think of these results, and what do you think that means for 2014?
Hi, yeah, Reineke here. First of all, I'd like to have a comment listening to you and Simon about the quorum, and I also wholeheartedly agree. What I thought was interesting from the grid data that you sent over, Lenny, the bigger picture, is that there is lots of interest, but it actually is going down compared to the year before. And I was like, that's actually quite an interesting aspect, and that holds true for communities, that held true for most of the qualitative techniques. And because I completely believe with Simon that it's big data, and that there's lots of emphasis on the data component from the research providers, from the clients, to understand how can you actually use the data that you collect for information purposes, for insight purposes, but everybody struggles with understanding then the why. And one of the things that we see from the client is, for example, because they're using so much already their own data, the big data, that we see that there's a kind of decreasing tolerance level, if that's a word or a way to describe it, for market research processes. So, for example, I've been closely involved with media measurement in the Netherlands, and where the clients, there wasn't a good sample, or it took too long to get the results, and clients really, because they have data at the fingertips, they expect the market research agencies to act quicker, to be more agile. And that's one of the things that I think, and you mentioned communities, is of course what communities can do, because you can go quickly into a community, ask a couple of questions, and get results quickly. So agile is the key word, and having a good, solid sample and performance, and give feedback to your stakeholders quickly.
Will, can we go back to that slide for a minute? Thank you. Let's leave that up just for a minute. So, Ray, obviously, kind of good news for Vision Critical, right? Communities are I think, have reached not just critical mass, but now mainstream, and the take that we all have so far of the communities kind of driving this new model of agile, flexible research to get to the why, while other pieces of analytical work around kind of the big data paradigm help inform more of the directional or specific research. So, what are you hearing, and kind of putting on your Vision Critical hat a little bit? What do you think that means for a company like Vision Critical, or any large organization that's adapting into this new marketplace?
I think there's some very interesting things going on with the growth of online communities. One of the issues is that it doesn't fit very nicely with the definition qualitative or quantitative. And I don't just mean that the very large communities tend to do a lot of quant, and then the smaller communities run by the likes of the Community Space and Insights Consulting do a lot of qual, because actually there is an enormous crossover. So the big communities are doing qual as well. People are doing short-term, slightly larger exercises. So the first thing is that when we look at the global figures from the likes of SMR that say what percentage of the industry is quant, what percentage is qual, that is going to get harder to say as we move into these more discussion models of doing business. The second is that one of the trends that's coming through, and it's in here, micro surveys, links very closely with communities. If you have an ongoing community, you're talking to these people for 2 or 3 years or even longer. You're talking to them every week, every month. You ask very short surveys. You have all their profiling data. You have all the answers to every survey they've ever taken part in. You have answers to every discussion they've ever taken part in. So you can afford to ask very, very short surveys. Many of the surveys are 3, 4, 5 minutes long. They're mobile friendly. They're agnostic. They're not mobile only normally. And so you end up with this ongoing relationship. And it changes the relationship with the client as well, because you're speaking to the client every week. So you're getting that background briefing on what is important to the client, what are the issues, who are the personalities who actually implement Insight. And so all sorts of things are becoming very dynamic. And I think that the 10, 20, 30 companies who are really specializing in online communities are in a good place, I'm happy to say.
Yeah, so we're not going to reveal the other big piece out of this grid data of the most innovative companies yet. A sneak peek of that will be coming. But I can say that those companies that are focused on communities tended to be in the top 20. So I think you're right. They are in a good space. Now, Jeffrey, you arguably monitor the industry more so than anybody, particularly with your focus on Twitter and your vital weekly updates on all the news that's fit to tweet. So what's your take on what's being discussed so far, and was there anything in these results that jumped out at you?
Well, what I find fascinating about these results is the continued collision of technology vendors and research firms. And I've had a number of consulting discussions this year with research companies that are developing technologies, some around emotion and some around some of these different emerging methods. And so they're trying to understand, we're traditionally a research firm. How do we develop technology? How do we integrate that into what we're doing? Because we need to do that to be differentiated and to be more successful in the future. And then I'm also talking to technology companies that come and say, look, we're technologists, or in some cases, we're neuroscientists. We have this expertise, but we're trying to figure out, how do we apply this better to the market research industry? So we need to understand the industry and the best practices more than we have in the past. And so you're seeing these two very different types of companies try to learn from one another and become more like one another. And there's been some companies where you look at the company and you're like, are they a technology company that provides research, or are they a research company with a really strong technology? It's fascinating to watch some of these companies evolve. Some are a little unclear themselves about like I said, are they a research company with a really good IT department that has built them some unique proprietary technologies for gathering research, or do they think they can position themselves as a technology company? And so the learnings and the cross-fertilization, I think, are producing what I'm seeing is growth going into next year.
I agree with you 100%. Would even take it a little step further. Of course, quasi-plug here. The IAX events that we've developed were to try and be fertile ground for that type of cross-pollination. And if you look at a lot of the companies that we picked to participate, they are more technology-centric. What's most interesting, though, and I want to go back to you on this, Simon, in a minute, for me is some of those conversations that I'm having also with client-side organizations that are looking for these new solutions and are impatient with the traditional research companies to bring those to market. So they are actually investing and setting up innovation labs and investment funds to support the development of these new solutions from technology providers, with the expectation that at some point the larger research supplier companies will step in and help. But sensing a real impatience on the part of the global Fortune 100 to wait for traditional suppliers to really get their hands around the technology. And I think that's going to be a big trend in 2014. I think we're going to see more clients actively advocating and supporting technology solutions that are very disruptive, that will be game changers for a lot of companies. Simon, you do a lot of work with consulting with research companies and a lot of work with clients as well. What's your view on that, on the tension between the traditional supplier marketplace and the emerging technology players, and what do you think we're going to see in 2014?
Well, I think we were already seeing this tension in our 2012 study. We characterized it as storm clouds on the horizon for the more traditional market research companies, because when we looked at the interest of clients in certain areas, very much as you have structured this question, Lenny, in grit, we looked at what the interest levels were among clients and measured those against the interest levels amongst research companies, and also looked at the intention of research companies to introduce many of these technologies and methodologies. And essentially what we found was that in so many areas, the research companies had left the gate wide open for new competition to enter into the market. There was a huge delta in some areas between client interests and agency intent to meet that interest. And so it's no wonder, frankly, that companies like Vision Critical in online communities have done so well, because there was a market there, there was a need there, and it wasn't being supplied. I think the same thing is occurring in social media analytics and in text analytics, and it's certainly occurring in big data analytics, where many research companies, I think, are completely confused as to what big data is, and it's true that there are many, many definitions of it, but also some are saying that's a completely different industry. I don't want to be involved. And so they are really ceding ground, I think. It's no coincidence that in the SMR Global Research Report, and you pointed this out yourself, Lenny, where they redefined mildly the definition of the industry. They showed growth year over year. But when you stripped out the newer entrants, if you like, that they had now included, the traditional research revenues globally declined. And I think that is because research companies are not in tune with what their clients are wanting, and or they're finding it extremely difficult to switch over the model that is necessary to sell technologically based solutions. It's not just about whether you have a great IT department that can develop technology. It's also about the selling of technological solutions. It's a totally different sales process. And so this is very, very, very difficult for a lot of research companies to get their arms around. And it's what's basically causing the changing shape of what we consider to be our industry.
I'm nodding my head. Agree heartily. Reineke, what's your take on that? Oh, Reineke?
Is this better now?
There we go. Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's the difference between muted and unmuted. That helps. I was saying that I completely agree with Simon, but I do want to stress that it's not always that the large or traditional research vendors don't want to change. It's very hard for them to change. There's the organizational structure they are dealing with. There's some of these traditional research vendors, they actually have all the information sources in-house through different, through some of the different companies, but they have a technology legacy that's holding them back. I've talked to some of these research vendors that are dealing with hundreds and sometimes thousands of different technology systems, IT systems that they have to integrate. So it's really is a matter of changing the boat very, very slowly. And then at the same time, these technology vendors, they take the nice bits, they go where the money is. So they're dealing with competition that is actually taking away some of their most profitable projects, and so it only gets harder for them. One of the big things that I and the clients of the vendors keep asking me is about the competition and who is our competitor. And of course we have the Google, and maybe you could even at a certain moment discuss that Facebook might become a competitor, or Twitter. But also it used to be such a world where the big competing with each other, but now where will competition come from? Who will be the new entrants in the market? Who can do what you do better and faster and cheaper? And I think that's one of the big questions I see the agencies struggling with, is like, because they have that legacy, they can't move that fast. They really have to find a way to still earn money in next year and the years forward, change their structure around, but at the same time being attacked from all different angles.
Okay. I want to switch gears just for a minute. One, I want to remind the audience to please submit your questions. And I have actually been remiss in looking at Twitter, which I have changed now. So we'll get to some questions in a minute. Will, can you bring up the next slide? And we'll get into the questions from Anish and Luca in just a minute. But we touched on this, and I wanted to kind of wrap this up on this client-supplier dichotomy. So we did analysis by client versus supplier, obviously. And I think it was interesting on the differences between in-use and under consideration. The online communities were significantly up on the supplier side, but down on the client side. Same with mobile surveys. The opposite for social media analytics. The opposite for big data. So what does that tell us? My read on that is that clients have already adopted those methods, or are not paying as much attention to the methodological considerations as they are the end results. And because the shift of interest for them is around social media analytics and big data analytics, I think that reinforces at least my view on this, that the clients are less engaged with the idea of methodology, or more engaged about about cheaper, faster, better, or more impactful, and are looking for the solutions that can really deliver information to them in a more holistic and integrated way. Would you guys agree with that take? Or
this is Simon here.
Yes,
Lenny.
Simon.
It's just looking at this. It's immensely instructive. It just shows how suppliers are behind clients in terms of where client interest is, and maybe it's because, as Reineke says, it's very difficult to change, to turn the ship. But whereas clients were heavily interested in online communities and social media analytics, and mobile 1-2 years ago. Now that suppliers are following them. But if you then look at social media analytics and big data analytics, it's the clients that are leading the way. The agencies are a long way behind. I think if you do this survey in 2014 or 15, you might see the agencies actually catching up. But it's very instructive. Where the clients are decreasing in interest, the agencies are increasing it. Where the clients are focusing, the agencies are not there yet.
Yeah. Jeffrey, what do you think? Same read?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity to interpret this data to write up this section for the group report. And as I was looking at it, I'm like, well, some of them, because if you look at the in-use numbers, one of the ways I was interpreting it was if clients are using it and suppliers aren't providing it, then traditional research suppliers aren't providing it, then clearly they're making do with technology-only solutions, and they're providing. Some of the market research departments are providing a research expertise layer on top of a technology platform that, for instance, in social media might have been meant for buzz tracking or market influencing or even customer service rather than traditional research. So as Simon had referred to earlier, because research firms have left this gap for technology firms, I think that's where these clients have already turned to satisfy some of those needs. Even if the solutions aren't optimal, they're going to make do with them. And so now the research firms are running at a disadvantage. They have to catch up with those platforms that are already out there.
And Ray, what's your take?
Slightly different. I think we've got some very different costs associated with some of these things. Online communities, whilst they are fantastic, they are expensive. And to see 82% of clients saying we're using them or we've got them under consideration is really quite interesting. But I take a different spin on, first of all, social media analytics and then big data. I don't think it is that the insights departments are social media analytics. I think that what we are finding is that companies are using social media analytics. They're not buying that through their insights department, so they are not buying that through research companies. I think it's not that the insights guys are saying, no, I'm not going to go to research companies. When I look at a lot of my clients, a lot of them have scaled back the social media analytics they're using because it doesn't answer market research questions very well. It does a fantastic job in terms of PR management, reputation management, reaction marketing. So we're seeing the home for social media analytics in the client side, not necessarily being in the insights department. By the time we move to big data analysis, that is much truer. Big data analysis is often located in IT, is often located in the finance department, and they will call on the insights team to help them interpret things. But it is a much, much bigger topic than market research. It would be outrageously foolish for most blue chip FTSE 500, FTSE 200 or the really big 500 companies to locate big data in the insights department, because big data also looks after the CRM and the customer management and logistics and so many other pieces. So I think the challenge for the research industry is how do we interface into those places. So it doesn't surprise me to see clients ahead of research suppliers in those areas. It would surprise me if it turned out it was the insights department who were managing those projects.
Yep.
Well, Ray, I mean, this is Jeffrey. Isn't this a survey of? I mean, this is a survey of people from the Green Book blog, from the new MR list. So my interpretation, was the respondents in this particular data, are client-side insights folks. I mean, I think your broader points are right about the overall market, but I think for this data, the respondents are coming from the insights department or have a market research interest, and I think they're adapting tools to sort of meet that need. But for this
absolutely, Ray back here. So absolutely, Jeffrey. But when I talk to the insight managers at the clients, when I'm running workshops or when I'm doing work with them, they're aware of the social media analytics that are going on. They get copies of it. So when they're asked the question, is your company doing it? Very easy for them to say, yes, we're doing that. But it's not them who are driving the process. It's typically not the insights department, and this is a generalization. There are masses of places where they are making some of those decisions. But generally, the purchase decision, whether to go Brandwatch or Radian 6 or whatever, isn't located within the traditional insights department. And I think that is one of those issues, and that will be even truer of big data analytics. So when I talk to them, they get sent some analytics from another department and asked to interface the research. The first time they're asked the question, it's often an unethical question saying, can we tag the identifiable market research responses back into the big data? So the first thing they do is say no, which often sours that relationship a little bit and is going to be another issue we could cover, which is, are we going to be bypassed in this completely identifiable age of the near future?
Yeah, and I want to get to that, Ray. Jeffrey, since we, it's my study, I think you're right, and Ray's right as well. And in the previous version of Great, you may remember that we actually dived into this idea around social media analytics and who owned it within the organization as part of a deep dive, and that was what came out of that. That's why we didn't ask those questions this time around. That it seemed pretty apparent that the research organization didn't own it, but was involved with it. So good point for the next version of Group. We may want to dive into that a bit more on this idea of who's owning these approaches. But the previous data we have does indicate that this is being driven at a much higher level than within the research organization. Although, that said, I know that there are differences within some organizations. So let's say Procter & Gamble, for instance, the marriage of their big data analytics, broader analytics team with the insights organization, it's much more cohesive than it is in some other companies. So I think we are seeing that shift. And it does bring up the idea of, well, who's going to win that battle? Because somebody's got to own it.
Well, Lenny?
Yeah, Reineke, go ahead.
I wouldn't say that somebody has to win the battle. I think that they should to go to war together. And we call it the intelligent enterprise, but you can name it any way you want. But it's really those teams should work together to create one intelligence department within an organization. And instead of having different information streams coming out of different departments into the organization, because that only will create confusion, and confusion is the last thing that companies need at the moment.
Fair enough, and great point. So I think we can jump on that in a minute as well, of what the future of the Insight organization looks like with this emergence. So I promised that we get to a couple questions, so I want to throw these out really quickly before we kind of dive into the next flow of the topic. Anish asks, can we talk a bit more about how crowdsourcing will impact research, and especially respondent panels? And I think that's interesting. If we go back if you can go back one slide, Will. Let's look at that crowdsourcing number again. That came near the bottom of the list, which is surprising. And looking back, I wish that we had actually separated out crowdsourcing from co-creation instead of kind of bunching it all there together, which I think is what we did. But crowdsourcing certainly seems to be at the bottom 5, which I found to be surprising when we look at the adoption and growth of co-creation methods, which certainly are embedded often in communities. So, back to Anis's question, Jeffrey, let's start with you. What's your take on how crowdsourcing is going to change things, particularly from a panel perspective?
Well, it's interesting because crowdsourcing is another area that's kind of started outside of the industry, and you look at some of the innovation platforms for crowdsourcing and co-creation, and many of them, don't have much of a market research angle. So Again, that's another party that we're a little late to. So in terms of, I've seen a lot of creativity in integrating that in different tools, from having surveys where respondents see what other respondents have answered. So within a traditional quant exercise, there's this qualitative asset that's building and that people are responding to. And then in communities, I'm seeing better tools around sort of voting on ideas. So, it's always been easy in these communities to post lots of ideas, but it's been tougher to manage. When you have 1,000 ideas, how are you exposing them to representative samples of the community and getting them to respond? And through paired comparison, especially pairwise comparison, is something that a number of tools have adopted in the past year, which makes it, you're showing people 2 ideas and they're voting on which one they like better. It's giving you a more representative mix. So it's trying to take the best of the qualitative aspects of crowdsourcing and give it more of a quantitative basis, because otherwise there have been some studies that what happens is there's sort of a top hits effect where earlier items that were put in the crowdsourcing community get voted higher, and because they're on the top list, they get voted higher, and so it's sort of a winner-take-all instead of really making sure that all of the ideas are being evaluated. So I think there's still lots of interesting technological and methodological solutions to come as we try to talk about what Ray was talking about as this hybrid of qual and quant.
Now, Ray, you and I are actually on a panel discussion next week on this very topic of crowdsourcing, well, co-creation, with a Vision Critical panel. So there's a plug for that webinar. But what's your take on the broader implications? I would actually step back and think about crowdsourcing from a social perspective, and how the integration of social media sourcing as a utility will impact panels. And are you seeing any changes in the Vision Critical panel business, or even in the community recruitment business, as a result of that?
Hi, Lenny, Ray here. That wasn't a plug. The webinar is on Tuesday. That is a plug.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
In terms of crowdsourcing, I think that there are 2 or 3 really interesting things. The first is that it's another topic, as Jeffrey said, whose natural home is not necessarily market research. At the MRS conference back in March, we had 4 crowdsourcing experts come in and talk to us, none from the research industry. So one was from Idea Bounty, talking about how they solve solutions and they created ideas. We had somebody else from crowdfunding, and he challenged the audience and said, well, rather than test an idea with market research, you can put an idea up and see whether or not people will kickstart it with money. And that's another way of evaluating ideas. Somebody else was translating the works of Jeremy Bentham, and somebody else was creating a share economy. So we need to recognize that in some of these zones, we can utilize them, we can employ them, but we are not going to be the masters of them, because there are many other people using them for quite different reasons and with a lot of experience and expertise. I think crowdsourcing is going to grow, particularly in online communities, but I am not sure that it will be relevant to panels. Sometimes I can see that you could go to a panel and say, who can answer this question the fastest? How many cappuccinos are drunk in San Francisco on an average day? And everybody will go out, rather like they did with the ARPA test, red balloon test a few years ago, and try to think, can I find out about how much milk is sold, how much coffee is delivered, can I gross it up from takings? It doesn't have to be market research. And I think one of the fun things about crowdsourcing is that it very quickly moves outside of the market research zone. But if we take that issue about why would you go to a panel and say, who can solve this problem, when if you are a major brand, you could go to your Facebook page and say, we're going to give $2,000 to the first person who can solve this question. And this question doesn't have to be creative. It could be factual. It could be how many cups of coffee are drunk in this city. It could be which of these products is most likely to succeed and why. And I think about the Red Lake mine that Wikinomics talks about and opening up the geographic data. I think that this could be a very interesting challenge to market research, as well as being something that we could be doing.
Sorry, still on mute. I think
Hi, this is Reineke.
Yeah, go ahead, Reineke. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually listening to Ray. I wanted to add an example that I've seen for crowdsourcing is in the retail industry, where there's a lot of price comparisons always going on. And I spoke to a vendor who actually uses crowdsourcing as a way to get the latest pricing or to get an overview of how certain commercials or offers are in how they look in the shop. So they sent it out on a Facebook page or on a community page saying, hey, who wants to go to Amsterdam to take pictures of this grocery store and that drugstore, and it has to be within 20 minutes or whatever. And so you can actually get points by doing so. So they actually use those people to add information to their retail database with pictures and prices.
Yeah. There's what was the company that was making a push into the research about a year or so ago that was using a crowdsourced approach for mystery shopping?
Field Agent?
No, not Field Agent, although they certainly utilized that too. No, it was a Gigwalk, using a similar model. So, yeah, I think we'll see more of that. So we've got another question from the audience I want to throw out, and then I want to move into the barriers of entry. So, Will, if you want to bring up that slide while we wrap up this last question. Gert asks, are social media analytics realistic or just too demographically swayed? i.e. user base is just not representative. Or is that outdated thinking? Simon, why don't you tackle that one?
Lenny, could you repeat that? I wasn't quite sure that I understood it.
I think the gist is she wants to know that social media analytics really appropriate for research, or is even asking that question indicative of outdated thinking on behalf of researchers?
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting question. My belief is that social media analytics is still at a really, really rough formative stage. I think a number of the initial solutions, even ones that were very highly successful, were pretty blunt instruments. And I think the question of, is it representative, is and remains highly relevant. I think many of those initial solutions were not thinking well enough at least, about who they were listening to and what that meant. And I think that's why you saw, Annie Pettit, for example, rise in the ranks of the industry, because she was a voice out there saying, look, it is possible to apply the rigors of research to social media analytics. And she showed ways as to how that can be done. I think there's a long way to go before we can say that social media analytics have the sufficient rigor to really be valuable. But undoubtedly we're getting there. So I would say that the question is not outdated at all. I think it's probably the major question that we should be asking about social media analytics.
Reineke, what's your take?
The question is not outdated, and I actually think it's a misinterpretation of maybe the audience. I think there's a lot of value in social media monitoring, and combined with qualitative, combined with communities, combined with online research. It's maybe some people got off on the wrong foot, and again, it's not easy, and I'm definitely am aware of all the challenges that you face. when trying to combine social media monitoring with quantitative research with qualitative insights. But it definitely needs to be part of your insights program now and moving forward.
Yeah, that would be my take as well. I think that it's not the magical panacea or replacement, but it certainly can be a very valuable addition, and particularly when we think about ideas like single source and the types of behavioral and lifestyle data that's available through social media analytics, and how that can enhance the profile of consumers.
Yeah.
Going into the realm of big data, that becomes incredibly important.
Absolutely, and if I can add, I think one of the we don't talk about it here, but also behavioral monitoring should be part of it as well. I think one of the things from social media monitoring is that you shouldn't think about it as being representative or being representative for your population. It gives a lot of insight into the extremes, and the extremes are actually quite intriguing. And we experiment with a community and then test it out and test some ideas out in social listening and the other way around. The whole social listening and whole social media monitoring helps you find sparks, find new ways, find the people who are really passionate or very negative about you, and that's just as interesting as representative sample and the normal awareness information, for example, that you track.
Yep.
Lenny, it's Simon here. I would agree with Reineke that there's, it can act by monitoring the extremes. It can spark and it can act as an early warning system. And I think maybe the use of the word representative is what trips people up here, but I think it is still really incumbent upon us to ask, are we listening to the right people, whether it be the right people for an early warning system or for co-creation or whatever our intent may be. But I still think that we need to be asking that question, are we listening to the right people?
Fair enough. Fair enough. So we're at the top of the hour. We allocated 2 hours
hi, Lenny.
For this. Yeah, Ray?
Yeah, I'd like to chip in because I disagree really with both Reineke and Simon on that. I think that representative is an outdated concept. It kind of goes back to a concept that's popular in engineering in Germany called the house of quality. You do great sampling, then you do great field work, then you do great analysis, and the result must be good. And I think that we have recognized that what we do has got a lot of holes in it at every stage. So the test now is, does it work? Things that work, we should keep doing, and we should try to find out why they work, by all means. And things that don't work, even if they look representative, we can't keep doing. And social media works, for example, at monitoring when everybody is saying the same thing. So when Apple launches an iPhone that doesn't seem to work for left-handed people, you can very quickly tell by the barrage of comments out there that this is a mistake and you need to react to it. You don't need to measure how bad a mistake it is once you know that it's an absolutely awful mistake. The degree of awfulness doesn't matter. The degree of wonderfulness doesn't matter. Last night, we heard the sad news of Nelson Mandela's death. We don't need to measure the pure volume of sentiment on social media, but just a quick glimpse on social media tells you the depth and the quality of what's happening out there. So it's all about, does it work, not is it representative.
It's a fantastic point, Ray, and it would also bring up the question of that we may ignore, which is the idea of influence. And you can't divorce influence from social media. So even if it's not representative, the viral aspect of social media spread through the factor of influence can make it incredibly impactful, whether it should be or not. So I think we haven't tackled those things sufficiently yet. It's certainly something that we have to continue to pay attention to. So Ray actually was going to ask you to throw up another poll before we transition into kind of our closing focus on reasons for not using some of these methods. So for those of you that are experimenting with our automated subtitles, what do you think? Did you try it? Was it useful? Was it better than nothing? Was it good? So please let us know what you think.
Interesting to see that it says quiet. Good.
Yeah.
No, I said it's interesting.
Yeah, that's my bad. So we'll give people just a little bit longer to vote. We've got 53% have voted so far, and interesting. Okay, so let's share that information.
Not tried them. Not very useful and quite good. So, well, I guess we'll have to try it again.
Or maybe the maturity of your audience is English.
Yeah, I suspect that's probably part of the case as well. So, hence, well, we'll need to try it again when we're maybe have a broader non-English speaking audience.
But even there, if we look at just the 15% of the audience, it's not many people, but a bunch of those people found it useful. And I guess you could argue that even if that was 2% or 3% finding it useful, then there would be quite an interesting argument. I've been quite interested in how it went through. We've got another poll question now, which we'll just show very quickly, which will suffer from the fact that not many people use them. But this will tell us what language people chose to see those polls in.
And as a side note, I tried the Dutch ones. They're actually quite good.
Good.
Okay, a couple more minutes because we had 55 votes on the previous one, so let's see if we can reach the 55% voted mark. Not. Well, maybe. Okay, so close and share.
Okay.
And that's quite interesting. Talking with Sue, who's set all this up for us today with Translate Your World, was saying that quite often people do choose to see them in English. So even if English is your second language, by watching the subtitles in English, you get 2 goes at hearing something. You hear it orally and then you read it, and it can back up. What did Simon really say that? And it helps you accommodate for North American accents or European accents.
All right, so more on automatic translation as we go. All right, so guys, I was saying just a minute ago, we allocated 2 hours for this. We're not going to use 2 hours. I think my goal now would be for us to move towards wrapping up in the next 30 minutes. So here's another data point. We asked for the reasons for not using methods, and this is not just emerging methods. There's also traditional methods in here as well. And I think this is pretty interesting, particularly if you look at some of the traditional methods, telephone, mail, face-to-face, too expensive, time constraints, even it's boring. So, those certainly came out. Some of the things that jumped out at me was the technological limitations. So I know this is difficult to read for those of you that are watching. You can get a blown-up version of this on Greenbook blog. We posted it there as well. But if you look at the, so let's say, which one jumped out at me? well, social media monitoring. Technological limitations at 8.4%. Lack of proof it works, 12.6%. Certainly some pragmatic barriers there to adoption. So rather than me rattling off all of this, what jumps out at you? And let's start with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, what jumped out at you in looking at this? That's not being put on the spot.
I'm not sure
right?
Yep, I'm not sure that my immediate reaction was we have to come up with a better way to visualize lots of data.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I agreed. But it's raw data, kind of. But other than that, go ahead, please.
I did want to ask you a question about the weighting, because you had referred to it earlier that you weighted things differently from year over year, and I see that this chart is weighted as well. Is the weighting around country? Could you just talk a little bit more about how results were weighted? I understand that the sample is different this year, and so the weighting is designed to make comparisons possible, but I just wanted to understand a little bit more about that method.
It was by country, Jeffrey. That was the primary thing. Yes. Yeah. Again, we had such a large German contribution from our friends from Research and Results. That alone made us need to kind of rethink the weighting. Yes. So it's geographic. Then was that it?
Yeah, I'm no huge insights are coming as I look at this. I'm sorry. It's interesting because I did have the chance to look at, as if this isn't enough data. I'm looking at it and I'm wondering, wow, how does it differ by country? So I definitely look forward to spending some time with this. But sorry, I don't have any insights on this for the moment.
All right, well, let's look at a couple things.
Okay, Lenny,
yep.
just quickly. I'm looking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns from the left, which is lack of proof it works.
Yep.
And there are a lot of numbers on there. Not only some of the new stuff, the social media monitoring and the research gamification, there's nothing in there that people are really comfortable with. And I think that is interesting in that we talked about the blue chip buyers wanting agencies to move faster, but we also need to make people comfortable that this stuff actually works. And I think most of us would look at some of the new stuff, and none of the things on here, but some of the new stuff may not work at all, frankly. And I think that is an interesting indictment that there is so much concern that things don't work. So either we've not proved it, or maybe some of them don't work. So I think that is a worrying column in there.
I think, Ray, this is Simon here, when you put that together with lack of knowledge
Yep.
on the right, and ignorance, which is interesting to know what the difference between those is, but and then unproven, you put all those columns together with the fear column. That's, it makes your point absolutely clearly. It's everything on that is traditional. We're not using because they're not flexible or they're too expensive or they're time constraints. But everything that is new that we're not using, either we don't know about it, or it's not proven, or we're afraid, or we need more proof. So obviously there's a lot of case to be made for these things that perhaps isn't being totally made just yet.
Thank you, Simon. That was the overall theme that jumped out at me. If you look at the traditional stuff, obviously it doesn't fall into the cheaper, faster, better category. Right? People are impatient. It's not serving the needs of the business, but huge educational issues on the new techniques. So, Reineke.
Lenny, just to add to that.
Yep.
So
Go, Jeff.
when I looked at the client's lack of imagination, and we are the old-fashioned clients. I wonder if that is a rationalization of suppliers' inability to prove the methods, to communicate the benefits. it's easy to blame the clients rather than yourselves.
Yep.
For some of these things, and obviously, in any market, you've got early adopters and early majority and laggards. But as I looked at that, I didn't feel like it doesn't seem to reflect an adoption curve. It just seems to be sort of a general, clients don't get it; it's their fault. And I think that's
and I wonder. Yes, I wonder how much of that is also based in the business model. Study, well, I'm not being asked for it, so obviously they don't get it, so I'm not going to try either. There's a lot of tunnel vision with the traditional research companies of not offering these technologies, not trying to prove them out to clients for a variety of rationalizations, and that falls in that category. Reineke, I'm sorry.
No, thank you. No, it's interesting because as I mentioned at the beginning, I've looked through the larger database, and what actually struck me with, especially this one, is that it's almost the responses from client side and supplier side are almost mirroring each other. So I'm not completely sure that it's just the client who doesn't get it, or the supplier who thinks, well, we don't have to offer it. I think it's a generic industry challenge, and we are talking about it a lot. We as new MR, as being early adopters, but there's a lot of unawareness, fear, doubt, uncertainty, whatever we want to call it, in the whole industry about other techniques. And I hear that a lot when I'm talking to clients about emerging methodologies, and sometimes, and I'm not making this up, sometimes that could even be online research, saying, oh, but there's lots of clients and researchers who aren't as far along in this whole adoption cycle as we are, and it's vendor side as well as supplier as client side.
Well, I wonder how much of that is. So this really kind of kicks the door open to thinking about some broader issues around education, around PR, around marketing. As an industry, I don't think we do a very good job, and some of that's just the basics of the business, right? So yeah. You're in the middle of doing it, and you don't have time to look up and see what's going on, and you've got proposals for you, got projects, just focus on what needs to be done. But in the trenches, I think that's true, and that's a huge issue. But at the senior levels, it's not. The senior level decision makers on the client side are paying attention. They are looking at these things, and they are spending money and investing resources to pursue some of these things. That's how I pay my bills, is doing that. So, and you guys do as well. So, where's the breakdown occurring from an educational perspective for the folks that are really in the trenches in research of being able to understand and engage in these new methods and help us all field test them to move it from early adoption stage into mainstream? How do we deal with that as an industry? Is it a trade association issue? Is it a marketing publication issue? Is it all of the above?
I almost should, if I might, Reineke here, it's almost, we should ask the audience here, because they did found us, and maybe we should do a word of mouth campaign. Every time I talk to a market researcher, I'm telling them about Twitter and the Emergence tab and how much hashtag and how much I get out of it, and with regards to information and meeting people, and blogs that I read. And Simon, I'm a big fan of your blog, for example. There's so much information out there, but you have to educate people, and maybe each of us has to go out there and educate 10 friends or 10 people in the industry, and that's how it works.
Okay, so how do we spread the virability then of that? So I think that we do stuff from echo chamber. I mean, everybody on this panel, we all talk to each other fairly often, right? So we communicate, and so no surprise that we're thinking about these differently. But I'm very clear that, as much people joke about Ray or I, being rock stars, it's like, well, I'm big in Romania, it's a very small audience of influence. So, and recognize that very clearly. So, we need to kind of spread that out. Simon, I think you're much more engaged with kind of the larger organizations and certainly your relationship with SMR. What's your thinking about all of this?
It's interesting because if you talk to people who go to conferences these days, and I talk to people coming back from Istanbul, for example, and you say, well, how did you enjoy it? Well, it was the same old thing. You know, everybody telling us that the sky was falling in and these new techniques are going to take us over. And, you know, I'm bored with hearing this. So I think there's a larger echo chamber, which is the people who actually go to conferences, who perhaps normally are a little bit more senior, are getting bombarded by this sort of stuff. So that's not the problem. It's not an association problem necessarily, although I think the associations really do need to think about the definition of the industry, and they are. Then there's the echo chamber of organizations such as this, New MR, and your grit readers and people who read Future of Research, and Forrester. And again, they're probably more senior. Funnily enough, in our latest Future of Research study, we incorporated a sample of new researchers, young researchers, and talked to them about what they saw in the industry. And they were the uneducated in our sample, which really surprised me. And I think one of the reasons that many of them were not being taught in college, whether they went through an MSMR program or not. All the things we're discussing here, they're taught traditional research, and they come into the world, and that's what they're doing. So I'm, very much of the mind that we need to start educating at the youngest level, and that even in middle management, I think within buyers, within clients, I think you would find probably a fairly widespread lack of awareness, or maybe lack of confidence in many of these new techniques. After all, who wants to be fired for trying something new and it not working?
All right, so we are going into the last 15-20 minutes here, and there are some questions that the audience has put out. I want to get those in. One from Dan particularly appeals to me, at least to the geek in me. So I want to throw that out, and then we're going to move into kind of thinking about 2014. So Dan asks, what's the most pioneering thing that we have seen this year? Apart from the Avengers, of course. In fact, what would the research methodology equivalent of the Avengers movie be? And that is just a great question, Dan. Thank you. So what's the coolest thing we've seen this year? And let's just do a quick round robin. Ray, we'll start with you. What's the coolest thing you saw this year?
Okay, two. I've seen a couple of fantastic MCAPI projects. One of them in Africa, looking at where is beer sold. And we saw a rebroadcast of that on Wednesday. You can catch it if you want to do it again from Miguel at Confirm It with Heineken. And that was going into a place where there is no internet in a lot of it, of using phones to capture masses of data, images, and stuff like that, which showed what you can do when you really use a little bit of technology and a lot of organization and thinking. And the second one was a presentation in Australia by Commonictus, where he took all the open ends from about 10,000 people who were flying on Qantas and evaluated the causes of satisfaction and dissatisfaction from their open end, rather than trying to do it from their scales, and he got much better data. And we saw something very similar, that empowering the whole world with some of the technology and text analytics were the two things that stood out for me.
Yep, those are good ones. All right, Jeffrey, how about you?
Yeah, so I referred to it earlier, was Field Agent. So Field Agent, so I've done some work in mystery shopping over the years, and Field Agent is basically a mystery shopping research network through an iPhone app. But you can use it for very spur-of-the-moment things, as Reineke was mentioning. You know, go to your nearest Walmart and take a picture of the shelf display of this. Or I want to ask you a question about your experience at this retailer. Take a picture of the receipt, so that I know that you were actually there. And then there was another one that I saw related to that for holiday shopping, where they basically took a picture of Target receipts, so from the U.S. retailer Target, at the end of Black Friday, and built market share based on that, when they had like 3,000 responses. So they, you know, had really good market share data. So that was one of the most interesting I saw this year.
Okay, I'm going to dive in real quick for Reineke and Simon. Actually, the coolest thing that I've seen, and this may be kind of breaking a rule, but it's within the Inside Innovation competition right now. One of the ideas called Found It, which I just think was pretty amazing, where they're basically utilizing a SKU lookup app on your mobile phone that, once it connects to the SKU, then has a database that drives in questions related to those purchases and starts building up this big data personal profile of data, of information based upon your actual purchase behavior. And on that note, what would follow on would be, secondly, the whole emergence of single source and omni-channel data. It's not just pie in the sky ideas right now. Companies like Pure Profile, Handshake, Golden Dawn, et cetera, are aggressively developing solutions that are building amazing deep profiles of consumers, combine their transactional, attitudinal, behavioral, et cetera, and it's all consumer driven and with explicit consent by the consumer, so there's nothing kind of NSA nefarious about how this data is being collected. The consumers are finding value in that. So I think all of that's incredibly cool. Simon, and then Reineke, we'll let you wrap it up. Simon, coolest thing you saw this year?
I would echo you on multi-source big data analysis. I've seen that up close more and more this year, and it does blow your mind. A couple of other things I think that are very, very cool. Zappy Store, which is full service DIY. I think just the very fact that TNS decided to put their conversion model on that was eye-opening. I think Rewe, so both of those were your innovation winners.
They were. Thank you for the plug. Yeah.
And what they've been able to do on a global basis very quickly through non-incented, almost random internet sampling. And finally, Revelation Next, which is probably the most elegant solution to digital ethnography that I've seen, combining the elements of Facebook and Pinterest in a research tool to make it a really wonderful experience for the respondent.
That's a nice shout out to Steve August there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, Revelation is a nice tool. All right, Reineke.
Yeah, going lost, very difficult. Now, one of the most interesting things I've seen is not necessarily one company, but how you can use mobile behavioral data and mobile/tablet behavioral data, seeing how the whole customer journey works. How do people start at their mobile and move on to their tablet, or the other way around, and actually finish the whole transaction on their laptop? And there's a couple of companies that are looking into it, trying to test it out, and so comes Arbitron research now. But when it works, it really is giving a lot of insight for companies to act on and to improve their customer journey.
Okay. All right, so we've got a couple more questions, and I'm getting messages to wrap us up on that. There's one, though, I have to to repeat first before I hand it back over to Ray, and that's from Fenella. I'm assuming that is my old friend Fenella Scott. And if that is you, Fenella, then it's so good to hear you. She wants to know about communities. For B2B, any best practices to recruit, engage in delivery of content? Ray?
I'm going to take that as a chance for a little plug. There's going to be a new VCU launched in January, and we've got lots of best practices on that. The key thing about a B2B community, it's like any other community, but you've got to think about why would somebody join it. And in a consumer one, it's about making the consumer experience better. So I'll join a Coke one to make Coke better. I'll join a Delta one to make Delta better. I'll buy a NASCAR, join a NASCAR one, etc. For a B2B, there's usually what's in it for me. So I'm going to get inside track information. I'm going to get closer to the source of how things are done. So the thinking and the positioning, whether it's a short-term community, a long-term community, whether it's one of ours or somebody else's, you really need to focus on the B2B, what's in it for the people taking part. Great example, and this is not one of ours, it's somebody else's, but in Australia, the Australian Tax Office has a community of small to medium-sized companies. Because it's a tax office, it can't pay an incentive. Why do people bother to join it? Because they're trying to reduce the cost of compliance. As long as they believe that by helping in this community, the paperwork will be better, it'll be more understandable, they'll get a better hearing, then they're willing to put their time in. So for B2B, you've really got to focus on what's in it for me.
Okay. All right, Ray, we've got one more poll. Why don't we throw that up?
Doing that now.
All right, so if you could invest $100,000 in any MR startup, what would you choose? I know what my answer would be.
And just while people are voting, we've had several questions about sample sizes and methodology. All of that is going to be in the GRIT report. Yes, we could answer particular questions here and now, and we'd probably get them right, but they wouldn't be very memorable. You'll be able to look at all of those. And Lenny, when is the report going to be available?
It will be January. So we're planning
January
on publishing.
sounds good to me.
Yes, considering I still need your section, Ray. So, yes, we will publish the full report in January, but look for a few more sneak peeks between now and then. All right. Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. Big data, ethnography, and gamification. Big data would have been my pick. Panel, any thoughts on that?
You don't got to get far with 100K in big
well, that's
data.
true. That's true. That's true.
I think gamification is an interesting top one there. I think that's one area where education is still lacking. We have a few real ambassadors like Betty Amu. I probably mispronounced her name. But that I think is very interesting. That we should be on the lookout for that.
Ray?
I think if you were looking for a good return, then taking Reineke's point, 100K in gamification would probably give you the best return because it's a relatively big sum for a small area. But my absolute pick, and the one I'm putting a lot of my time and effort into next year and the year after, is text analytics.
Okay. Jeffrey.
Wow, I text analytics, I've looked at a lot of those vendors. I've looked at about 24 different vendors, and I would not put my money there because it's such a crowded, competitive world, and the level of computational linguistics, somebody will be a big winner, but there's going to be a lot of people who lose a lot of money.
Good point.
Okay. Well, I've already bet on text analytics, but I also have bets in all of these, actually, except for communities. So, so I'm risk averse. I'm spreading out my personal interest in each of these. There's a couple more comments on Twitter, but we are at the hour and a half mark. There is one that Banglaman, Dr. Khan from Bangladesh, asked, and I think we'll wrap up with that one. And if everybody else wants to engage on Twitter with answering individual questions, that'd be great. He wants to know, what's the reason that mobile surveys in use amongst clients was significantly declining? I have an opinion about that, but let's kind of broaden that out and think about, as we look at some of these methods, why are we going to see shifts of clients moving away from them? What's your take?
I'll start off, Lenny, at Simon here. I believe that to be a bit of false data, in as much as I think, with the exception of, in the moment research or specialist applications of the type that Reineke was talking about, mobile is actually a fact of life now. We know that a very significant proportion of people who access online surveys are trying to do so on mobile devices. That, I think, will only increase. So virtually every online survey now has to be mobile ready. And I think it's just going into the mainstream, apart from, as I say, the specialist approaches. So I think, actually, it's probably a slight twist in the data.
I agree with you 100%. I think clients just don't care. So they expect it to be delivered in the most effective way to meet the needs of the project. And mobile's just table stakes. So I think it's just a non-issue for them.
I would disagree.
Okay.
Because I do think that we have a similar thing as what we mentioned before, that there was, with social media monitoring, there was a chomp on it saying, oh, we need to go to mobile, and now people take that step back, because if it's, I do agree with you that all research should be mobile ready. What I think in clients' mindset is, however, they think they have that small, limited survey in mind. So you can only ask certain questions, no big grids, and they're like, oh no, and they can't let go of these long online surveys as similar to the grid one actually that we saw today. So it's the client mindset is still set on long surveys, and that's why they tend to move away from pure mobile, not thinking through that actually all surveys are in fact already for 25-35% mobile.
Okay, I think there's probably some validity to that for some clients, so we have an educational issue there as well. Jeffrey, what do you think? Jeffrey, are you on mute?
Sorry, I agree with Reineke that we're, I think it was Bernie Malinoff of Element 54 who said, that matrices are the crack cocaine of survey researchers, and we're still addicted to those. Sadly, I just wrapped up a survey this week that was 68 pages and full of grids, despite my best arguments, and so that's a survey that can't be filled in mobile. They don't even want to think about building it mobile, and trying to nudge them into the ideas of the micro survey of gathering the data through chunks, through different methods. That's a big transition for them, and that part of that is the psychology of the adoption curve. They haven't seen it, they're not ready for it, and they will be driven there, and they will be driven there by the increasingly low response rates that I'm seeing from customer feedback surveys this year. But they're not quite ready to give it up yet.
I do agree with that, Jeff. Yes.
Okay, so it'll be the same paradigm as web, that eventually the pragmatics of and the financials of the research process will force the issue. So that's general consensus.
Right.
Yeah. Ray, anything different?
Broadly, Simon, a couple of just remind us that globally web is about 40% of all quantitative research. So actually it is, although it's the single biggest, we can run away with the idea, those of us who do mostly online, that everybody is doing it for everything. There's still actually, there is as much postal as there is entirely mobile going on. I think that there has been a slight temporary pullback in Western markets from purely mobile studies which capture video and the rest of it because of some of the processing issues. People are suddenly getting 500 videos and 10,000 photos, and it's just bedding in a bit about how do they process it. But where there has been a massive uplift is in the developing markets, where we're seeing people going from face-to-face to mobile. And that is not touching online at all. That is going straight face-to-face to mobile.